Hello there again. Ian and I are met for another tutorial, and this time we're going to be moving him forward into how he feels in taking role while he's teaching, where he moves the work very much into the now time of social encounters. Now we have to help us today Derek Stevens, who's come along because I wanted to try to show you and Ian as many roles as possible. And so rather than have a lot of children and a lot of classes, what we will have are depictions, which Derek will draw for us. Thank you very much. Now then, Ian, the first thing we have to consider is your comfort. You see, it's no good you tackling this next stage if you feel desperately uncomfortable in doing this.
Yeah.
So today's tutorial is really about how comfortable are you as we move you through the various stages of working in role. You see, you're going to be entering with the class into an agreed and invented social encounter. So that's why people can call it drama. It's an invented social encounter. But it's in a context relevant to the learning curriculum.
Right.
And so we'll try and sort out those rules that you'll need to consider if you want to work in this way.
Yeah.
So Derek will represent our ideas,
Right.
but we can test them out, and Derek sometimes will represent the class for us as we need it. Now we have here your air and wind curriculum idea, as you might have laid it out in terms of doing some kind of related work for all the curriculum. So I'm going to ask you first, as a primary school teacher, how you think you'd tackle this if you were doing it as a project.
Yes. If we were working on something like this as a project, I think we'd talk together as a group. We'd try to get some ideas, the class and I, about the areas that we'd want to work in, the things that need to be done. Maybe a brainstorming activity, something like that.
Yes.
And I think once the project areas had been decided, maybe we take something like pollution as a particular thing. We'd then start to collect some evidence to do with pollution. They might go off and measure some things or collect some data, which we'd then bring back and look at and review and write up.
Yes.
And so the project would build up out of bits of the topic, which children would go off perhaps in groups and do. Either write up or collect evidence for and record, and we build a whole collection of things together.
Yes. Now it always seems to me that when I'm teaching, I'm trying to find tasks for the children to do that enables them to learn what I hope they may collect from doing those tasks. Now the sorts of tasks you seem to be talking about is discussion tasks, research tasks, which means you've got to provide some kind of material for them to research. You seem to be discussing recording tasks of one kind or another. Are there any other, if you think of it now in terms of how many other kinds of tasks can I envisage them doing then?
Well, there'd be writing tasks.
Yes.
There would be artwork display tasks.
Yes.
There'd be maybe some interviewing type of work.
Yes, if they were finding out evidence from a person.
From a person,
you mean?
yes. There'd have to be some presentation tasks if they were, as a group, had something to offer the rest of the class.
Yes, yes, I see, yes. Well, all that to me is very laudable and very respectable. When you come to break down things like interview if the final product is an interview task, how many skills will Ian have to teach for that interview task to make the children realise what it is they know? Because this is what we're at all the time. Not the finished task, but the process task, which actually engages the children in fixing their learning. You see, it's very well to say, let's have the material for them to research. What do you have to be able to do some research? Because frequently I do see children browsing through books, but they can't research in the book because the high skills of researching are not taught. Now, what we are going to be engaged with is teaching the high skills so that the curriculum is actually engaged with, not browsing and so on. So we're discussing rigour here, Ian, and I'm not denigrating anything to do with the rigour of what you've just said. What I am going to try to point out that when we take it in another way, to give you an alternative approach, because this is one you know about, rigour is going to be at the heart of it. And when I say, are you comfortable, one of the questions will be, are you comfortable with the rigour of it? Now, I would say the same question must apply here too, of course. So rigour is always going to be relevant. Now then, we discussed your mantle of the expert, if you remember, and what we were going to suggest was that you would run a company called Airsol.
Yes.
And you had somehow to get the children to believe that they ran, to agree anyway, that they ran this business called Airsol. Now, in this tutorial, we are not concerned with how Ian gets Airsol going. We are concerned with how he gets this inner voice and this inner ear going that makes him able to speak as a colleague, not as a teacher. So now I'm going to say, let's have a look at how we'd run it then, not as your project running, but as we would run it if we were dealing with Airsol. Now, this would be my first act, because we need a visual reminder that we are consultants. And so, obviously, I would put this and we'd get used to this. This would be always part of it. We are Airsol consultants. Now, it might look nothing. It's simply a piece of paper. But there are all kinds of things that matter here. This word foreshadows. Now, you've already foreshadowed because you said we would discuss. But when we discuss as consultants, we carry a certain responsibility that discussion alone doesn't carry.
Yes.
Our name, which I in this case have invented because I want to get to those particular concepts, we solve air problems, is very wide. And finally, we are open to be seen, to have meetings, to bring people in, and so on. We welcome observers, and so on.
So that's a sign that this is what's happening.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's a cheaply made sign, as you can see, because the children must always understand the process we're going through. I'm also interested to see if it gets destroyed, because that will tell me something about how much it matters, you see. Now then, we'll just remind ourselves of the letter that was coming. Here's one for you, Derek, so that you know what we're on about. That was coming from the Cardiff Garden Festival Committee. And this lays out the whole of the curriculum. So what I'm going to do is show you how many things I think you would introduce in terms of this if we began it not with your discussion, not with your decision together about we'll deal with smog or whatever, but we'll deal with a context. Could you help me just put this over without disturbing your material? This will do. I'm just going to lay down here what would be entailed in this letter. Now, if we look at the third line down, we have the statement, on a matter of some urgency. Now, let me get my notes here. There are 4 things you have to remember. I've said it to you before. If you do good to anyone, you must do it in minute particulars. Teaching is not broad strokes, like putting emulsion paint on with a roller. Teaching is like petit point. You build second by second. The second thing is you have a responsibility as a teacher. A child must know things, but a child must realize it knows those things. Knowing you know it. And this will be built in to this structure. And the third thing is a child must be able to use what they know they know. Now, it seems to me that's the difference between what you said about your project and what I'm saying. In my case, they must teach somebody else what they know because we've deliberately placed it here.
Yes.
They are creating a wind pavilion that will teach the general public about air and wind, those 2 concepts we have. And there are 3 R's in this. One is what I've just been saying. They must realize their knowledge. It has to be built in to the structure of the work. The second thing is there must be rigor in the work. Rigor for you and rigor for them. I'm preaching, but I care about it terribly. That it is not regarded as messing on, decorating the curriculum. It's like an arrow going straight to the heart of what teaching's about. And the third thing is, the children shall be responsible for the quality along with you. It is with the class that you work, not towards, and certainly not against. The last thing is, this letter provides motivation to get on with the curriculum work, if you can win them to it. And this is why you need the voice.
Yes.
And it is this letter that makes that face matter, that drawing, the 2 sides of the brain, the affective zone and the cognitive zone. This is the affective zone, and it carries with it 34 cognitive suggestions. Now, if you go down to line 3, on a matter of some urgency, what this allows is the letter to put the pressure on, not the teacher. Normally, it's the teacher that's putting the pressure on. I can make the letter do it. So I don't have to get into any kind of dictatorial position. I'm being it with you, but I'm not trying to be it with the class. So here we are. I'm relying on the letter to put the pressure.
Right, yes.
The second one, you see, we had intended to create a very special environment. Now, this is about detail. A very special environment allows you to insist on, because the letter is asking for it, the detail is put in the letter, but it gives opportunity for free-ranging imagination. First of all, we can range all around to what we think this air pavilion could do. And again, it's not you saying, of course we'll have to think about that. And of course, it also allows you to start from scratch, to think for yourselves. Nobody's done this ever before. We're not reading a book to find out how you do an air-wind pavilion. The next one, you see, we have, which will help people to explore and enter into it. when they go into the pavilion, not just stand and stare at it. So this suggests we have to be creative about active processes for people who come to it. Now, the letter then is loaded with all these things. Now, I'm just going to lay them out. All levels of interest and intelligence, age, any pre-knowledge they may have, and whether they're male or female, must be taken into consideration when we build this air pavilion. So we can look at how will we do this for 5-year-olds who come in, and how will we do this for young parents who come with their 5-year-olds, and how will we do it for old grandmothers who come, because the Garden Festival wants to include as many kinds of people as would be prepared to come, and we want them beguiled. We want to upgrade our class. So part of this letter, for example, we understand your organisation, Airsol Consultants. You see, this upgrades the participants. It acknowledges they are a firm. Then you come to statements like, matters of atmosphere and weather. Now that defines absolutely precisely the area and field of curriculum concern.
Right, yes.
Then we come on to the effects of wind in nature. You see, again, it's hitting into a very precise research area. So this defines and specifies a second zone. The first is the general field, and then it says the effects of wind in nature, and so on. So we get, it demands the consideration of building constructed for a specific purpose. So those children are going to be engaged in not just any old building. This is going to be created from nothing, and it is to do with wind and air. The mind can range, but eventually it will be pinned down to the man with the trowel. So they're going to go through that kind of range, you see. Is this making any sense? Are you overwhelmed?
Rather daunting, yes.
Yeah, well, we've only got to number 7. I told you there were 34. In one case, the letter invites very broad considerations, but it actually defines very specific aspects. Listen to this. In which as many aspects of the air all round the earth. So we're now getting into trade winds, the way winds move in the various locations, from the equator to the Antarctic and back up to the Arctic and so on. Then between 10 and 16 on these cards, you have this whole business of you're going to have to label things. You're going to have to specify, and so on. Now, you may say, oh, well, you know, I don't think I want to be bothered writing a letter as complicated as that. In actual fact, you do get the knack of it, because you start to realise very precisely what it is you want the children, the kinds of tasks and experiences. Now, can you hear the curriculum moving in?
Yes.
Can you see any science possible? All this is an invitation. You've got to make it happen. You see, a teacher decides how rigorous they are prepared to be. And in this case, I'm saying to Ian, you risk everything on your first throw. The first throw is the letter. Now, you've 34. I'll make you a gift of them for the moment.
Thank you.
But now I'm going to deal with the voice. Because, you see, this is the bit that roll is about. Now, you see, I can't say, will you all sit up and listen to this letter that I've invented? I have to somehow set up the colleague element. Now I've got to hear that colleague voice. Now you see if you can hear one. How might you, what sorts of remarks might you make? Now the sort of remark that I might make is, excuse me, do you mind just dropping what you're doing? There's something come in by the late mail. I think we should all just check this out if you don't mind. Now you see, I'm using restricted code. Check this out. What the heck does check this out mean? We know it's not teacher voice, though.
Yes.
Just pop over here for a minute. Or, by the way, I think we're onto a big thing. You know about the Cardiff Centre. Have you heard about where the new garden festival is going to be? Well, we might be onto a big thing. You see, all these are promises now.
Yes.
And what is big thing? I will not mention money. That is for me a moral situation. You can do it the way you want it. I never first introduce cash, just as I will never introduce smoking or drinking. For me, that is a moral issue. When it's introduced, I'll deal with it. I will never put my own morality forward. What I will not do, though, is introduce aspects that I believe are less relevant to what we're doing. When they bring up money, I shall deal with it. And there'll be no criticism in it, because we must be paid. We are consultants, you see. So, I haven't had time to have copies made for you. Now, of course, you may choose to have copies made for them. Now, if you choose to have copies made for them, what Ian will be confronted with is a lot of heads and rustling paper. And these are young children. You decide, is it better that they feel important, they've got a folder and a file and a letter, which will be very cheaply made, of course, or they've got to share a letter with a group, or they have to translate through you what this means. Now, I am not saying one is better or worse than the other, but those are the choices I've made. I've decided, because they may not be used to having loads of bits of paper to flip about, I won't yet have copies. Neither will I waste a photocopier if I don't need it. I also feel I can get the pauses in the right places if I keep the letter first. However, where I sit with the class will make quite certain, and I would not have an underlined version, Ian, will make quite certain that they can see I've got nothing up my sleeve. I'm reading exactly what it says. So now I'm going to begin my beguiling now time. Now you see, I might put my glasses on. I actually don't need glasses to read this, but it allows me, you see, to cut myself off and intrude myself on. And you do what you like. It suits me to do that.
So it's a sort of signal to them.
It's a signal, the letter. It also allows me to change my attitude like we do in the real world, because the dignity is the dignity of the work here, not my personal dignity. So, well, the address seems to be, and I'm using words like seems because, you see, I don't want to look like I've read it all. I've kept it for a month on the desk. It's rather exciting, and I haven't really read it properly myself yet. It seems to have come straight from the administration site office in Cardiff. Now, I'm not sure just what that means yet, but it sounds, and I'm waiting to see if anybody tells me. Oh, it might, yes. Site offices, is that what they are? Oh, So, even at the very beginning, I've spent my life demonstrating I don't know much. You know,
Yes.
and actually it's true. It's dead true. You never know enough. And then we come on Dear Consultants. They've obviously seen an advertisement or met one of our clients. I'm building a history. I am writing to you to inquire whether you'd be able to assist the committee of the Cardiff National Garden Festival 1994. Oh, it must be in Cardiff next year, of some urgency. You know, they always want jobs done before they've asked us, don't they? Always want these things urgent. Can you drop what you're doing? Now, that's the sort of tone. Now, you may say, oh, I can't spend a whole hour reading that. And I'm saying, well, matey, if you're not comfortable doing that, go back and do what you said. Because this hour lays in all the curriculum. And they'll not forget. Because the affective zone. Now, the thing that will make me pace it fast and slow is their ability to pay attention to the letter, to discourse together about what the letter is asking of us, and so on. And when they are getting tired, I'll speed it up. Say, well, look, we haven't time to do all this. The big thing is, are we prepared to take the job on? And then I'll find another way to go through it, you see.
Yeah.
So that is how I would tend to approach it. Now the tasks then are laid in through the letter. It invites them, first of all, to socially agree. It invites them with the first task of responding, that a letter will have to be sent in terms of whether we'll take the job on or not. It will invite them to see whether they will design a pavilion. So getting some tentative looks around at buildings is going to be laid in from the very start. So it invites a lot of research quite early, but it is not the research from books at this point. It's digging into your own knowledge to see if you can even dream up an air pavilion. What sorts of ideas would we have? We are consultants, so we're not going to rush to books straight off. Dredging up what people feel they already know. You see, it asks whether you could actually show smog. Well, I don't know if we could show smog, you know. What do you think? Is it worth a try? What is smog? So discussion groups early on are bound to come through this letter. Now, you'll be hearing how you might talk with and to them and around that letter, while I find the next stage of the letter, and we'll just see how it would work out if they had done this. You see, a teacher needs the gifts of an inner ear. Can I hear the voices I need? Not my teaching voice now, but all those other voices that I have really in my life. But can I isolate the one I need? And the second thing is, can I find the words that make that voice emerge as a colleague? Now, the voice in this case is that of a colleague who has enough power to generate work, but ultimately has the trust to delegate it, but the power to oversee it, to collect it back, to draw people together. It's that sort of tone, and it's the smallest venture into role. And you see, you can drop it at any time and you can say, do you think this is stupid? Do you think it is silly to think that a letter like this could be sent to consultants for the garden festival? And people, it is so reasonable that they would get a letter like this. That a festival committee does have to find experts who will help them to set it up. It isn't one little man with a trowel in his hand. And so children, I find, always say, well, yeah, it does seem pretty reasonable. Right, yes, well, you
When you move back, you can just move in and out like that then?
Very easily. When you move in, it means that you're building the trust to move out. And when you're out, you're building the trust in the artificial thing you've made. And does it seem reasonable to you is one of my most important questions. Do you think people might, when they're doing the Cardiff Garden Festival, have to have consultants like us to do wind and air things like this for them? Right, okay, then we'll go on, shall we? And then you can go back to your voice. Right. Now then, we've discussed these two. Now then, Do you feel you are comfortable in entering with the class? Now, the way you talked about a project seemed to me you are, because you talked about we would discuss and so on. The agreed invented social encounter is why you've to come and say things like, do you think it's reasonable that somebody would write to us as consultants, you know, from the guidance centre? And do you believe this context is a relevant context to enter into your particular areas of concern, that air is everywhere and that wind is air in motion? If you believe that, then you're ready to go forward.
Yes.
And did you feel you might be comfortable with the sort of tone that I was using? Not that you'd use it like I use it, in what I did with the letter. Right.
Yes.
And of course, when we come to minute particulars, that letter has to be somehow displayed later on. And all the promises that I've put on these cards somehow need to be put round it so that children can see that this is about that. Now, I wouldn't put those cards round. They would be written with the children in mind, so that they keep the power. So it would be like, he wants us to think hard about shapes. So this is my private collection, but then I'm reinforcing what was said in words by writing, and that is what will help them choose what they're interested in. Thinking hard about shapes. He wants us, he says we can design it the way we want it. So that is bait. And there's your, you know, your break time, little job, dear. I'm sorry, that's how teaching is. It's your break time, little job. And you takes your pick, whether you sits and has your coffee because you need that more today, and there are times when you do, or whether you get excited and do this, you see. Now then, what we're dealing with here is not just an alternative, it's a complete, radical, different power shift I'm asking Ian to undertake. All information will be given through the colleague code, and that is really radical. All material dealt with will be used. The children will teach to somebody what they have decided they will do to help this man who sent this letter. It is built into the system. If you can't take the power shift, get out of the kitchen. Because you can't run it without that shift of absolute straight on to each other. That do you reckon this is good enough for what our firm wants to know about, wants to be known for? Right, well, we'll try it once more for the record then. And it's never, you'll do it for me. Because I can't use that kind of power. I'm not comfortable with it. Because I can't ever go out of the classroom feeling that I've created a circumstance in which they have to forgive me for a broken promise, a broken relationship, and certainly using power in a wrong way. So that is for me a big issue, you see. So I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying for me, I can't tolerate the other. I find it very difficult to sack people, I'm sure. So that is terribly important. Some teachers are very uncomfortable in this power shift, and your colleagues may feel uncomfortable. I'm warning you that they may say that class isn't as well behaved as it used to be. Because the class will start to say, oh, I've had an idea, you know, can I just tell them about it? Or, listen everybody, and where's the teacher, for goodness sake?
Yes.
And when people pass your classroom, they will see sometimes work they can't understand. If they stay long enough, they'll see the rigour, if you're putting it in. If they just walk past and the children are not in rows and you are not addressing the class, you'll come in for some flack and you'll have to take your own decision. What you think a learning process is ultimately what you'll answer and what will choose you. Now then, let's have a look then at the rules you will be applying, Ian. I'll just put it here. Sorry, I've lost my consultant, but it doesn't matter, Derek. I don't know if you can see it. You don't have to act. What you have to do is demonstrate action. So when I put my glasses on or off, it's a demonstration. I am not a character. The second thing is, I constantly remind the class that it is fictional.
Yes.
We've invented this. We are not consultants in the big world, but in this room we behave like we are, and we become so, because I address you as if you are, and everything I do treats you as if you are. The next thing is, you can stereotype. You don't have to be unique. If I put these glasses on, it might be a stereotyping of a managing director. That's all. I mean, I don't look like a manager. What is a managing director? But the sense of I look closely into things is a stereotype, and then I share with people. That stereotyping is perfectly reasonable. Later the children may want very specific kinds of people to meet, and then they won't necessarily want a stereotype. But you don't have to be a clever character actor. You don't have to characterise, and you can find your own style. It's no good me telling you you have to be comfortable doing it like I am.
Yes.
I am me doing it instinctively, the way it feels right to me, and you will always have your own here. Now, role builds belief in the context. The more I behave like a consulting firm, the more the consulting firm can get to the context, because I never do anything that's going to be outside that. And it lays in a focus. Oh, today there's been a phone call in. He wants us specifically to see whether we could get those dioramas ready. And I said, well, you know, we were hoping in 10 days, but do you think we could get on with the dioramas and get them finished today? And then we'll see if we can bring him over and get him to have a look at them. So the role allows you to pinpoint an hour or two of really heavy work in one area of your curriculum. It's up to you to decide which and when, because it's not doing it for you. It's this mythical man in Cardiff.
He takes all the blame.
And of course it stimulates a task. He wants the dioramas this week, is the task. It also moves, and this is important, because this is what this tutorial is about. At the moment, we are basically using the voice and a very small amount of gesture to create the affective zone. But gradually, your working role can become more and more expressive as you make more demands on them. So in the beginning, you might accept a short answer from somebody, but later you'll want a more elaborated answer. So you can get more elaborated and set up the thing as a lecture now, not just a discussion, and it becomes more expressive. Will you need a blackboard, might be a question. Shall I clean it for you? Okay, now he's going to fill the role of lecturer, or she, and you are going to be there supporting that role, because you yourself are responding much more expressively, you see, until we come finally to full role, which we'll deal with in another tutorial. You see, you begin with talk and restricted talk, because you're colleagues, but then you start using correct vocabulary. You can't go to a man in Cardiff and waffle. We've got to be sure he really understands this. Is there a better word for hurricane?
Mm.
You are dealing with emphasis. This is more important than this. So you're dealing with ordering material. Your demeanour, of course, begins to be gradually, as you feel comfortable, a little bit more demonstrative. So you take it your own pace, nobody's rush you, you do it yourself. The next thing is, and this is terribly important, in terms of I know that I know it, and I can now use what I know I know. And that is, you see, that inside all of us there's a self-spectator. In my head I can see myself doing things. Now, working in the way I'm discussing is you are deliberately awakening the self-spectator. I wonder what the man in Cardiff will think if we show him this. Is an awakening self-spectator act. And the self-spectator has to become so they can enjoy the self-spectator, because it's the self-spectator that sets standards, that creates empathy, that creates sensitivity. If we show him this first, he might be less worried about that. Mm. That's the self-spectator working. And without the self-spectator, you don't really get empathy eventually. It sounds a contradiction, but I enjoy seeing myself being important. I enjoy seeing myself explaining this diorama. I enjoy seeing him watching my diorama that I'm explaining. Yes, it's working. He is understanding. Does that make a bit of sense to you? That I don't hear the self-spectator discussed. But for anything to be created creatively and stand up to the cognitive challenge of it, the self-spectator creates the possible artist. The self-spectator breeds the craftsman. The self-spectator creates the pride in work. And paradoxically, it's because there's another to talk to that the self-spectator begins to be awakened. In this case, it's the man who will come and see us. If you walked in here, what do we most want him to notice that would make him trust our firm? There's a self-spectator question. Am I making it clear? I hope I'm making it clear. It's hardly ever discussed in teaching circles. It's what all actors know, all painters know, all writers know. I see what I am trying to do. I see this thing can exist through me, outside of me eventually. But I am the agent of making it.
Yes.
And finally, of course, this helps to induct this laboratory tone. We're all in this together. It's very reasonable, it's underplayed, and we're getting on with the job. Not you're getting on with the job I'm telling you you've got to do for me, because I tell you this is important. But together, this is reasonable and very detailed. I feel I'm just ramming it down, but it is so important. It is one of the most important things in teaching. Can the child enjoy themselves realizing they're doing this? They're doing this. And remember a little New Zealand boy saying, I'm going to give a demonstration of sheep shearing. Now, I myself cannot shear a sheep in 3 minutes. You can actually, if you get very clever, shear a sheep in a minute. Some can do it even less, but I take 6. Very well, that's quite all right. So I'm going to demonstrate how you take the beast and then he does it. And the self-spectator is what makes it possible for him to do it. He hasn't got a sheep there. In his mind he has, and he can demonstrate.
So what is in there creates for you what you're going to work with. I mean, you use an image that is inside that the self-spectator
Yes.
is aware of.
And because it's fiction, the self-spectator's bound to come in, because I'm inventing it. Not I'm inventing it, we are inventing it. Does that make sense? Consultants is a self-spectator statement.
Yes.
It takes a while, and all at once it just drops in.
So it's actually very much part of the role. It's one in the same.
If you say to people, get on and do that, there is no self-spectator. I'm wondering what he'd like us to think about first. Starts this business of what does he want us to do first. So we see ourselves doing it for him.
Yes. So it's a bit like a lens that things get focused in through.
Yes. And at this level, the self-spectator begins to monitor the children's behaviour. Instead of you having to do it, the work begins to do it. I'm not saying it's easy. You still have problem children who are not socially adept, who don't want to collaborate easily. It's hard for them to want to know to do this. I'm not saying it makes it any easier at all. What it does avoid, though, is you shut up and listen, which is a nonsense sort of statement anyway. It avoids that. When you take that little thing that seems so small, this I'm wondering what he'll want, and then you take it right through to say the most perfect performance of an actor in a full-length play you can imagine, that self-spectator is so awakened that every change of muscle he knows not just what he does but the impact it will have on somebody else, and he hears the feedback. Now that it's at its height in your finished actor, if there ever is such a thing, but the best performance the actor can give is the self-spectator at its most acute. But we are beginning way, way back, but it is the same element of self that begins slowly to monitor, how do I see the world? How do I want the world to see me? How do I want my work to be for me? How do I want, and it's not, I'm pleasing the teacher now. It's to do with, it's satisfying, it's as good as I want it yet, which doesn't mean it's good from your point of view, but it's the starting point of everything. Okay, now then, let me see where we go next. Now, obviously, the children will have prepared a letter to go back. Now, where you fit that into your curriculum is entirely up to you. Obviously, the letter they prepare will involve them in reading this, so it will need some copies. A teacher makes choices now. Does Ian, and I'm asking you directly, though I'm speaking to other people, does he want all the class to talk a letter out in public and he works as their scribe and makes them help him cross out until they're satisfied with it? Now that is a totally different curriculum skill than if he says, right, everybody can write back to the man at the garden centre, to this Mr. Owen, whatever his name is, Evans, Mr. Evans, and then we'll choose which one we want to go. Now that's a totally different learning experience, a totally different task. Or he can say, working groups, plan a letter, we'll see how we decide and then we'll work out the best one to send. Or we'll delegate people to make a composite letter. All these are different tasks, different learning occasions, different kinds of learning occasions. There's talking, there's reading, there's decoding, there's encoding, there's clarifying, there's changing round, resequencing. You put as much in as you want, and you decide on the format according to what you believe will do the best for you at the time. Now let's take the letter you will write back from Mr. Evans. I've asked Ian to prepare a letter that Mr. Owen Evans might have sent back, and we're going to look how Ian now uses the role. Okay, you've done it, haven't you?
Yes,
Good.
I've done it. There's a copy there.
So here's one. Shall I pass
There's
one
one
to
to do
Derek?
it.
There you are.
Thank you.
Now, just talk me through just a little bit as if we are the class.
Well, we've just received a letter back from Mr. Owen today, and I thought we'd see what he's got to say and maybe see what we're going to do about it. He's thanking us for the letter that we sent, and he's delighted that we're going to be interested in becoming involved in the project. So looks like he's pretty keen to have us involved, actually. And what he's indicating next is he'd like to meet with us. So he's saying he's going to be in Nottingham later in the month and would like to meet with us. And
Now, let's stop there because you've got your own voice. What you're doing here is, and this is not a criticism, what I am saying to you is what I've noticed. There is a certain casualness which will be very pleasant. You have to say to yourself, will it hook the kids that aren't listening? And what will I do to get more emphasis?
yeah.
And that is something I would suggest to you that you consider. That there has to be a little more deliberate signing, probably, to hook till you see.
Right.
Because it's very difficult for a child to sort out.
Yes.
There's a lot of words coming out. They will be excited that you've got a letter. And in my case, I would suggest to you, you put it in a rather large envelope. You know, a full A4 size envelope with our address very clearly written in a pen this thick. Even though it might be typed on a word processor. Whether you type it, whether you handwrite it, depends on what skills you want it to engage them in. Is it a matter of you can't quite read his handwriting? Because you want to get into handwriting. So he's not sent it, he's put a PS and you can hardly read it, even though it might be word processed first, and then a PS. Or little notes in the margins that make it look a bit untidy, and so on and so on.
Right.
What you did there was you interpreted the letter, so I would suggest to you, you kept the power to own it. Because you didn't read his words. You said, this is what he wants. Now, there'll be choices made here. If you want to say what he wants, you're simplifying it so that they get the grip of it before they have to tackle the whole thing. Perfectly laudable. But if you want them to get the grip, you have to emphasise the exciting possibilities. So that if he is pleased, you can share a bit of a celebration. It's a little bit more expressive. So you see, you're right to underplay, but you need a little bit more stress, I would suggest. And certainly I think you should be careful you don't own the letter through the way you interpret it. However, that's your start. That's what you've heard.
Yes.
And one of the things that may happen, you might hear this voice of mine hammering at you next time you try this. There'll be times when you say, oh, I feel an idiot doing this, but I'll do it because it matters. So the first moves you make tend to make you feel artificial, you see. Now, I don't know if you ever wear glasses, and I'm not suggesting all teachers wear glasses and grow their hair long and in buns. You know, I'm not on about that. But just the business of, if you want to underplay it a bit, and you want to interpret it because they're not yet ready to listen to the whole letter, they can't take it, and yet it's essential for the curriculum, then you get closer to them so that quite small emphases will work for you. Now you see, my problem is I have to go back a bit because I will overemphasise and deafen the kids on my left if I'm not careful. So you're structuring all the time, the minute particulars,
Yes.
you see. When you were changing at the beginning from him being pleased, you mentioned, they do look like they're pleased that we'll take it on and so on, the same tone tended to come out. So that the words all ran together in terms of emphasis. Now that's what I meant when I said a teacher has to hear and deliver. And this is where you do move a little bit towards the actor's skill, the business of differentiation of tone. You can practice it, you know, you can practice it on long walks. You don't have to get a reputation for talking to yourself or going off. But you do have to practice it. And that's when it'll feel a bit artificial, you see. Now we'll leave it at that, and then we'll move on to the next stage. Okay? Don't be too disheartened.